what is the source for the custom to end off an Aliyah on a high note that ends off with the name of Hashem? And is there any halachic validity to this custom?
Yes, first I just want to make a little bit of an announcement. This is a unique Q&A because there is no audience other than Jacob who's recording. And that's because, Baruch Hashem, we have a lot of send-ins in addition to the regular people who ask. And we're not always able to get to the send-ins, so it was thought that maybe we would have a special Q&A just to clear up the backlog. And this is Erev Pesach. This is right after B'dikas Chametz, so all of us are a little tired, but Be'ezras Hashem, we hope to get through as many questions as we can. So the question that was asked was, what is the source of the minhag that you end an Aliyah, either with the name of Hashem or in some positive note? You try not to end with a negative, and is there a validity to that custom? So again, it is important to note that there is no such requirement in the Gemara itself. The Gemara itself indicates when you can end an Aliyah, when can't you, and generally speaking, it's connected to the end of a paragraph division in a Sefer Torah, that you're not allowed to end an Aliyah leaving less than 3 verses to the end of the paragraph division, nor can you end an Aliyah if there's within the first 3 verses of the new paragraph division. That is the only halacha. And therefore, obviously the whole division of the Torah into Sheni, Shlishi, Revi, Chamishi, and the exact places where we do that, that is only mitam minhag, incorporating the very general guideline of the Gemara. So consequently, in the Gemara, there is bichlal no reference at all to having to finish with a Devar Tov, but it is brought down in the minhagim of the Rishonim already. When communities were establishing customs, we try to end on a high note when that is possible. Now, I do want to emphasize when that is possible, because sometimes the parsha itself ends. For example, just this last Shabbos, Parshas Mitzorah ends with the word tameh, which is normally kind of like a bad word, so to speak, or a negative word, but that's the end of the parsha. And the latitude that we have about aliyos does not automatically extend to parshiot. Parshiot is a much more firm division. Let me just remind you as well, although that wasn't part of your question directly, that this same type of reasoning that says we want to end an aliyah on something positive also says that when a book of Nevi'im ends on something destructive or negative, we repeat the psak before. So an example would be in Isha. Isha is, of course, Yirmiyahu Navi. So it says, Hashivenu Hashem elacha v'nashuva, cause us to return to you, Hashem, and then we will return. Chadesh yemenu kekedem, give us newness of days. And then the next pasuk says, Ki emos ma'astanu, if you have despised us, you have been very greatly angry at us. And that is actually the end of Eicha, and we don't want to end on that, so we repeat, Hashivenu Hashem elacha v'nashuva. The same thing is true with the last chapter of the Navi Malachi, which happened to be the Haftorah for Shabbos HaGadol that we read this Shabbos, where it says, Eliyahu Navi will come, he will return the lave of the avos to the banim and the banim to the avos, lest Hashem says, I come and smite the earth with total destruction. That is the end of the book. We don't end there, we repeat, Hinei Anochi Sholeach Lechem. So there is a general idea that we try to end on something good. And of course, the Shem Hashem is always considered to be positive. But it's not an absolute halacha. It's a minhag, and as all minhagei Yisrael, it's appropriate that we respect them.
The Rav has mentioned that it is mutter to believe in the theory of evolution, as long as you hold that Hashem directed the process. But nevertheless, the theory has a lot of holes in it. I was hoping the Rav could explain the details of what those holes are. And in consideration of them, does the Rav feel, on the whole, it is more logical to accept it rather than reject the theory?
Yeah, so this is a bit of a loaded question, and I always talk about hate mail, sometimes jokingly, sometimes seriously, and this is one of those questions. It's kind of like are you still beating your wife? Like whatever you answer you're going to get in trouble. But let me just say my position, and of course I have to make it clear that many of my chaverim and many of my rabbanim may disagree with me, and I am not making any official statements on behalf of VSameach. But I base it really on a very similar thought that was expressed by Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch shortly after Darwin's theory of evolution came out. And he was asked right then whether the notion of mankind evolving from lower beings, is that a contradiction to the Torah? Is that a contradiction to the story of Genesis? And Rav Hirsch said right then that, number one, he did not think the theory of evolution was proven, but even if it would be proven to a degree of 100% undeniability, it would not necessarily be a challenge to his faith as a Jew, as long as God is the orchestrator of the process. Now, Rav Hirsch said that all the way back in the 1860s, and I believe that is actually an accurate statement even in 2024, and that is evolution per se is not necessarily a contradiction to the Torah, as long as we understand that God is the architect of the creative process. But I would just add one little ha'ara, and as long as we understand that the singularity of the divine soul is not a product of evolutionary processes. Meaning, we might agree that even the development of the brain and tool-making ability and everything else might evolve from lower forms, but we do believe there's a singularity of the divine soul. Now, having said that, so the good news for a believer in evolution is that based on what I'm saying, although some would disagree with me, if I believe in evolution, but I believe it was orchestrated by God, and I believe in the unique singularity of the Jewish soul, I am not a kofar, I am not a heretic, I am operating within the boundaries of Torah. However, it is also important to know that the theory of evolution, which has become a virtual dogma, almost a religious dogma in the scientific community, in which you couldn't even question it, is in itself highly questionable. And indeed, as we get further and further developed in biology and understanding of these processes, it is seen that the theory of evolution is very problematical. I refer specifically to a number of people, but I think the outstanding person who writes and talks about this a lot is a fellow David Berlinski, and you can Google his name. And the reason why I love to quote him is because he happens to be Jewish, but he also happens to be an atheist. So he has no agenda. He's not trying to prove religion is right, Torah is right, God is right. He doesn't believe in God. He doesn't believe in Torah. He doesn't believe in in any type of deity. So as a result, his critique of evolution, I would suggest, it must be a very, very objective critique, because he has no prior agenda in which he would want to attack evolution. And his basic argument is, number one, the idea that that simpler organisms evolve into complex organisms is actually a violation of the laws of thermodynamics, in which complex systems tend to wind down under entropy and the like. So to kind of posit the notion that the simple gives rise to the complex is actually a violation of the basic physical laws of the universe. He also points out another thing that many other people have noted as well, and that is, in the pure Darwinian sense of evolution, it's based on a paradigm based on survival of the fittest, meaning to say that in any group, there will be a certain amount of genetic mutation or genetic randomness, and the characteristics that are most suitable for survival will tend to be the ones that will survive, and over time, those little changes can eventually produce different species. First of all, that itself is a bit of an implausible picture. It's one thing to say, a bird with a darker feather might be a better camouflage in the grass, but how that bird, turns into a dinosaur or whatever it is, it's hard to see the leap. But besides that point, he points out that a lot of the intermediate stages, in other words, you could argue, for example, that Z is superior in terms of survival to A, and that's why A will eventually become Z. But between A and Z, there's a lot of little steps. There's A1, there's B1, there's C, there's D. And in those little steps, there is not necessarily any type of survival advantage that would justify a survival of the fittest type of paradigm. So, if you would go in a sudden jump, even though that has never been established, then you could indeed make the argument that those that are most adaptable to survival are the ones that are going to flourish. But the Darwinian theory of evolution is very, very incremental. And in the incremental changes, there actually is no particular advantage. So these are the two basic, there are many, many more attacks. And again, one would have to study this. Berlinski himself wrote more than one book, and there are many, many others who have written this as well. But I think if you Google Berlinski, at least you'll get a start to understand the issue. But the two arguments are that going from simple to complex is a breach of the fundamental laws of thermodynamics. And number two, survival of the fittest does not explain incremental transitional states that do not confer any particular survival advantage, and there's no particular reason why they would exist. So because of this, therefore, evolution is highly questionable even from a scientific perspective, and that's important. Now, traditionally, when many Orthodox rabbis did take the position that evolution was heresy and kafira, so the primary arguments that we were making were the lack of the scientific validity of evolution. Now, those arguments are still there. However, my position is kind of a fallback position, that even if you're not convinced by the Berlinskis of the world, and you are an evolution chassid, I think we can still welcome you within Klal Yisrael. So as a result, I'm perfectly happy to live with what I recognize are almost two contradictory positions. On one hand, I say, you want to believe in evolution? Go ahead and believe in it. On the other hand, evolution happens to be full of holes. So I can live comfortably with either presumption.
We understand that the tefillin shel rosh holds more kedusha than the tefillin shel yad. Why is that so? And considering that this is the case, why do Sephardim say the bracha in the tefillin shel yad, and why does everyone affix the tefillin shel yad first and remove the tefillin shel rosh first? Yes,
so tefillin, of course, are holy, and we have the hand tefillin shel yad. We have the tefillin shel rosh. It is emes that although both are kadosh, the tefillin shel rosh have a higher level of kedusha in them. Part of it is the external bias, that the external bias of tefillin shel rosh has a shin, which is the first name of God's name, Shakai, the Almighty One, and the Kasher, the knot in the back of the head, is either a single dalet or a double dalet, depending on whether it's a square knot or a knot in the shape of a dalet. And that combines with the yuds on the shel yad knot. So that spells Shakai, so it does turn out that two of the three letters of God are in the shel rosh, and only one of those letters is in the shel yad. There is also an idea, although this is a little harder to understand, that because the tefillin shel rosh are four separate scrolls rather than one big scroll, there is a concept that kedusha, to some degree, depends on the number of kolafim, the number of parchments that you have. It's as if to say a place that has four Sefer Torahs might be holier than a place that has one Sefer Torah. That would be the analogy. Now, the reason why we first put on the yad and then we put on the rosh, and this is according to all opinions, so I'll first give you the drasha, that's the basis of it, and then I'll give you perhaps the underlying reasoning. The drasha is that it's the Torah, just follow what the Torah says. Ukeshartam lios al yadecha, you shall tie it as a sign on your arm, vayu letotafos, and it should be like a frontlet, an adornment, Bene necha. So the Torah itself indicates that the proper sequence is yad and then Rosh. But in terms of the logic of it, so there is a thought that a number of Svarim say, I saw this b'shem Rav Ovadia Yosef, but others say it as well, that we find by Matan Torah, the Jewish people were greatly praised because they said, Naseh v'nishma, we will do and then we will learn. Meaning, this is the unconditional idea that I commit myself to the Ratzon of Hashem even before I understand it and even before I know what it is. If they would have said, Nishma v'naseh, that would have implied, let's hear what you're offering and then I'll see if I'll do it. Naseh v'nishma. Now, on one hand, you can't really do anything till you know what you're supposed to do, but naseh is the unconditional commitment to action, even before you even know what it is. So Rav Ovadia wants to say that every time I put on tefillin in the morning, I am kind of going through a Kabbalah Satorah on a daily basis. I tie my hand. Now, my hand is my physical strength. It's connected my lave, which is my emotion. The head is my mind and my intellect and my understanding. The same way by Kabbalah Satorah, our commitment to action preceded our cognitive understanding of the mitzvot. So that is mirrored or echoed in the tefillin, where first we put on the tefillin shel yad, and then we put on the tefillin shel rosh. Now, by the way, that might be yet another answer why the tefillin shel rosh is actually holier. Because if the tefillin shel yad represents commitment to mitzvot, and the tefillin shel rosh represents understanding, then the tefillin shel rosh is connected to Talmud Torah. Talmud Torah connected kulam. So this is a bit of a paradox. On one hand, to properly learn Hashem's Torah, I got to commit myself to His mitzvos even before I learn. That got to come first. That's the foundation of the building. But ultimately, Talmud Torah is the greatest mitzvah. And that would explain the sanctity of the Rosh over the Yad. The Yad are mitzvos, and the Rosh represents the cognition of Talmud Torah. Now, the idea of the brachos simply is that the Sfardim who only make the bracha on the Yad, that's not quite accurate. In other words, what they do is they make one bracha on both the Yad and the Rosh, meaning the Nusach of Sfarad, the Mechaber, is that when I put on my tefillin, I make a bracha, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav zivanu lahaniach tefillin. That's not only going on the Yad, that is going on the Yad and the Rosh. The Mechaber's position is it's considered to be one mitzvah, and therefore you make one bracha, and only if you're mafsik between the Yad and the Rosh do you then make the bracha al mitzvahs tefillin. Now, Ashkenazim view it differently. Ashkenazim make the argument, this is the Ramah's psak, that Yad and Rosh are two different mitzvahs in the Torah. It's not like tzitzis. If I only have tzitzis for three corners, I don't do it at all, because that's nothing. If I only have a Yad without a Rosh, tefillin shel Rosh, or tefillin shel Rosh without a Yad, I put it on, whatever I have. So as a result, they always make two brachos. They make lahaniach on the Yad, al mitzvahs on the Rosh. But let me remind you, you will notice, those of you who Ashkenazi, that after we say al mitzvahs tefillin, we say Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuso Liolam Va'ed. Now, what is that doing there? Well, Baruch Shem is what you say when you say a bracha levatala. So even the Ramah that says Me'ikar Adin, you're mechuyev to make a separate bracha on the Rosh, acknowledges that according to the Mechaber, it would be a bracha levatala. So because of the chaimer of bracha levatala, we say Baruch Shem. So apparently we don't lose the bracha, meaning if the halacha is you got to make a second bracha, I got it. And Baruch Shem doesn't erase it. It's not a delete button. But if, chas v'shalom, we weren't supposed to make that bracha, so Baruch Shem takes away the aveira of bracha levatala. So I just want to clarify that the questioner was assuming that Sephardim only make the bracha on the yad. That's not really the way it works. Sephardim make one bracha on the overall mitzvah of Hanochas Tefillin.
And taking off the shel first?
So why do you take off the shel first? Because we darshan that since it says v'hayu is plural, that means whenever you're wearing the Rosh, you have to have both pairs of tefillin. In other words, the Rosh should never be by itself. Now, based on the thought I was expressing, this may fit to the idea that you can never have true Torah that is divorced from mitzvahs. Meaning, if I were to take off the yad and keep the Rosh on my head, that would imply there is some spiritual maila to pure learning that is not connected to doing mitzvahs. And that's not true. So therefore, the Rosh is on you only when the yad is on you. Of course, obviously the exception is, if God forbid a person is a double amputee, doesn't have an arm, so he does put on the Rosh. But other than that, the Rosh is always after the yad. And the Rosh is taken off first.
Why is the word mitzvah sometimes spelled with one vav and sometimes with two vavs?
Yes, so this is very interesting. This is a confusing question. But the truth of the matter is, it is largely a problem of modern Hebrew as opposed to biblical Hebrew. In biblical Hebrew, it generally is with one vav, with a cholam. In other words, an O. So you have either mitzvahs or mitzvos. Mem, tzadik, vav, a dot, which is a cholam, an O sound. So it's mitzvos. Now the double spelling is what is called kisav malay. Kisav malay. The double vav, is kisav malay. The single vav is called kisav chaser. Biblical Hebrew, with respect to the vavs, typically is chaser, and we simply use the vav both as a placeholder for the vowel O and as a consonant with a va. So therefore it's mitzvos. In the 20th century, the days of Eliezer ben Yehuda, when in Israel, in Palestine as it was called then, there was the Vad HaLashon. There were various committees about bringing back Hebrew as a spoken language, and there were a lot of difficulties. A lot of people had difficulty without reading vowels, etc. So they decided in a lot of modern Hebrew contexts to go with kisav malay instead of chaser, and as a result, when you have a vav that is coupled with a cholam, they separate the consonantal. Again, I don't myself remember the technical terms, but the vav, you see, can have double functions in the Hebrew language. The vav is a consonant sound, V, and the vav is a placeholder for the vowel O. Now, that could even be if it's not a vav. You can have shah, more, right? So you could write it shin mem vav resh, shah more. Now, when the vav is both the consonantal sound and the vowel sound, the Torah typically just had two birds with one stone, just one vav, mitzvos. But in modern Hebrew, in order to avoid the confusion, they opted with ksiv malay, so they would have the first vav as the consonant, the v sound, and the second vav as the vowel for that consonant. And hence you get the word mitzvos. But as I say, I believe that is totally a product of the attempts to make modern Hebrew a little easier to read.
In a similar vein, should one spell the word achshav with a yud or without a yud? And if we spell it with a yud, why don't we seem to pronounce the yud?
Yeah, that's a good question. Again, I will look into it a little bit. A lot of these are quite literally decisions that were made by what was originally called the Vad HaLashon, and then later the Academy of Language. And it's a very, very interesting history to look into the various decisions that they made. For For example, airplane at one point in Hebrew was called aviron, and today it morphed into matos. I remember learning Hebrew in second grade, and I was taught that the word for airplane was aviron. I think aviron is basically an extinct word today. I don't think it's used at all. Sherutim, for a laboratory, for a bathroom. When I grew up, it was called Beit HaShimush. Now, all of this is kind of based on the academy changing things. So I believe the Yud is once again connected to Malay, but I'm not sure exactly why. I don't know what the pronunciation issue was. But it was somehow an issue to avoid some potential mistakes in pronunciation. But I'll try to look into it.
When I was in high school, I had a project where I had to research a religion that was not mine. Which religion should I have chosen?
Well, yeah, this is a very, very interesting question. The obvious problem is that religions that are not Judaism sometimes may border on idolatry, and generally speaking, we are not supposed to investigate or study idolatry because, God forbid, you might be nimshach, you might be pulled after that derech, and therefore the Torah actually prefers that you don't study it unless you have special reasons for doing so. For example, you're in kiruv, you're in Jewish education, you need to know the other side to be able to combat their arguments. But if you're simply a student in high school or whatever, halachically we generally would not permit you to simply read about other religions. So it's hard to know if anyone would be good, acceptable, but if you really, really had to, I would actually say Islam is your best bet, because Maimonides already writes, and the Rambam was not a lover of Islam. The Rambam himself suffered, and his whole family, suffered tremendous persecution under Islam. But the one thing he says about Islam is that Islam, to its sole credit, happens to be a monotheistic religion in a way that he felt Christianity was not. Now, I've spoken many, many times in different Q&As, and I don't want to repeat the whole discussion. There is a huge machlokas rishonim. What is the halachic status of Christianity? And by Christianity in the time of the Rishonim, because that was pre-Reformation, we're really talking about primarily the Roman Catholic Church, or perhaps the Greek Orthodox, some of the Eastern rites, because you didn't have the Protestant groupings then. The Rambam's opinion is very clear. The Rambam's position is that Christianity, as it was practiced in the Catholic Church, was definitely an idolatrous religion, and that is because of two reasons. Number one, it gave corporality, physicality, to the divinity, in the sense of Jesus being God. And number two, the idea of the Trinity is a duality or a lack of unity within God, and therefore a lack of unity coupled with hakshama, corporeality, is tantamount to avodah zarah. And therefore the Rambam writes that the Christian worship is not only prohibited to Jews, obviously that is, but it is even prohibited to non-Jews. It is a violation of the Noahide law. A righteous Christian, according to the Rambam, could not be classified as chasidei umos ha'olam, of the pious of the nations of the world. This is the Rambam's opinion. Now, I want to add a little footnote to that. In spite of the Rambam's view that Christianity is avodah zarah, in spite of that view, he actually assigns it a positive role in world history, because it said it weans people away from paganism, and it gave them a sense of morality based on divine law. So that's very, very fascinating. On one hand, the Rambam has a very negative judgment of Christianity, treating it like avodah zarah. On the other hand, he sees it as taking people towards the worship of true God. Now, that's Christianity. Rabbeinu Tam, Rashi's grandson, who lived, of course, in Catholic France, takes the position, or at least some interpret him as taking the position, that although Christian belief may be erroneous, we don't believe it's true, but it is technically not idolatry, because they do believe in a supreme God who simply combines himself with various other entities, but there is this separate supreme God. So this is a huge machlokes if Christianity is avodah zarah or it is not avodah zarah. In light of this machlokes, it would seem safer to go with Islam, which according to all opinions, Islam is considered to be a monotheistic religion. In fact, there is even, it's interesting, everyone knows that normally, of course, a Jew is supposed to violate the Torah to save his life. It's not a violation. But we know for the big three, you have to be willing to die. And one of the big three is avodah zarah. The guy goes over to me and says, worship this idol or I'll kill you. I must give my life before I submit. It's yadua, therefore, that during the Inquisition or during the Crusades, if a Jew was said, convert to Yashka or I'll kill you, you have to give your life. Now, would you have to give your life if a Muslim came to you and said, acknowledge Muhammad as, God's prophet? So, the Rambam in the Mishnah Torah does not address this, but in one of his letters in the Geras Teiman, he actually suggests that because Islam is a monotheistic religion, there may not even be an obligation of martyrdom. Now, this is a much more complex problem than you might assume, because the fact that it's not avodah zarah is not necessarily the end of the game. Because the one thing that Islam does very specifically is it denies the immutability and permanence of the Torah. Because the theory was that the revelation to Moshe Rabbeinu got replaced by a superior revelation. So here's the question. Is the duty of martyrdom limited to that which is technically avodah zarah? Or does it apply to anything that is a repudiation of the fundamentals of Judaism? This is an important point because, in other words, the point I'm making is the universal agreement that Islam is monotheistic may not necessarily be machriya on the duty of martyrdom. In fact, there's a tshuva from the Rivash that says that because it is a kafira b'Torah, you do have to give up your life. So it's not clear what the Rambam would say lahalacha lemaisa, but in Igeres Teiman, together with a lot of other reasons, he does throw that out as at least a suggestion.
I don't know if this heter would apply in this situation, but based on Rav Ovadia Yosef's psak, that as long as you don't know what the singer looks like, you can listen to a recording of a female singer. Would it make a difference if she is alive?
Yeah. So this is going with a well-known psak of Rav Ovadia, who permitted listening to recorded music, not live, but recorded music of female singers if you don't know what the person looked like. And maybe I shouldn't say this because I can't say I know it firsthand, but there were reports that Rav Ovadia himself would listen to a very popular Egyptian female singer. But again, I read it, but I don't want to say for sure that was the case. But that is his psak. That's not the question. So the question is, would there be a difference if the singer is dead or alive? Well, I'm not sure exactly what the question is. The heter is even if the singer is alive. I suppose you might be asking it this way. What if you know what the singer looks like, but the singer is no longer alive? Could that be a heter even if you know what the singer looks like? That's a very, very interesting question, and that is discussed, but I believe the consensus of poskim is that would not be a heter, because the notion of the sound triggering fantasies based on visualization can exist even when the actual person is not here anymore, because you have that mental image, you have that picture in your mind. And Rav Ovadia's thesis is based on the idea that the kol is prohibited because it stimulates visual fantasy. And that's why if you don't have a visual fantasy, it's going to be okay. So l'chara, I think that would still, the Isha would apply even if the singer is not there anymore. Because it's not like we're afraid you're going to kind of, rape her or whatever it is. It's really the fantasy that's in your mind. By the way, this past week I got 2 questions about AI-generated female voices. Now with artificial intelligence, we can generate something that sounds like a woman's voice, sounds exactly like a woman's voice, but it's not from a woman. It's totally computer generated. And would there be a problem of kol Isha? So I think you have to approach it in 2 ways. As a technical problem of kol Isha, I think not. Kol Isha means a woman's voice. Now, even a recorded voice comes from a woman's voice, etc. So you could be mekel or you could be machmir. But so obviously, if you're mekel on recorded voices, if you don't know what the woman looks like, then AI, for sure you don't know what the woman looks like because there is no woman. But I would say that even if you're machmir on recordings of a woman's voice, AI is not a woman's voice. So in terms of technical kol Isha, I don't think there's a problem. But there is another issue here. And the issue is one of hirhor, of causing improper sexual thoughts. Meaning to say that even if something is technically mutter, if lamaisa it turns on a person erotically, it's something they should try to avoid, and therefore it would depend on the effect that it has on the person. In fact, I believe a few years ago, again, I'm not going to mention names, there was a Jewish male singer who was very, very, from Guy. He was very, very popular, but he had a very high soprano voice. It sounded just like a woman. And I think Rabbanim paskin that people should not go to his concerts. Now, obviously, it's not kol Isha. He was a man. But if it, whatever it is, if it connects you to that type of thought, so it's something you try to avoid. So that's something to think about.
In Tanakh, why are there no other people recorded that were named after the Avos, Imos, or Moshe, or most of the tribes? We see Menashe and Yoshua, but not many else. Korach was used twice. Surely there would have been tons of Avrahams, Yitzchaks, Yaakovs, Moshes, etc. So why don't we see these?
That is a very, very, very excellent question. I mean, first of all, the one thing you see in Nach is that there's a great deal of inconsistency. Do you name people after their ancestors? In fact, if I have to, I don't have the statistics in front of me, but I think the overwhelming number of names, people are not named after ancestors. People are given new names all the time. On the other hand, the phenomenon of connecting to your ancestor is not totally unknown. As you point out, we have some repeated korachs. We have, even on the bad side, we have Yeravams, Melech Yisrael, Yeravam is repeated. So it's something that needs a little bit of research, meaning to say, I could go with either model. I could go with the model like we do today. You always try to connect to your ancestors. Or I could go with the model that you give everybody a new name. But the biblical mahalech seems to be a little inconsistent, and it's really hard to figure out. And again, and your question is especially strong, because even when repetitive names are employed, they tend not to be the great ones. Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe. Moshe is not repeated, etc. Now, it's interesting that even in the, much later, the Mishnah and Gemara, let's look at post-biblical. You kind of have a bit of a similar type of problem. There is no Tana or Amora who is called Rebbe Avram. There is Rav Yitzchak, and there is a Yaakov. There is a Yitzchak and Yaakov, there's no Avram. There's no David. There is no David. There is no Moshe, although some of the Aramaic formulations might be Moshe. So it's a very, very good question. On one hand, there seems to be an idea, but it's not consistent. I'm thinking out loud here, that sometimes someone was so great that it would be a chutzpah to take on their name. Hillel is a very good example, right? Hillel The great Hillel became a Nasi, and Hillel started the Shulsheles of Rabbi Gamliel. So he had a son, Gamliel, and then Shimon, he had a son Shimon, Gamliel, then Shimon ben Gamliel, then another Gamliel, then another Shimon, etc. And it keeps on going for quite a while, till you hit Yehuda, Hanasi. But then Yehuda also doesn't repeat until a long while, till you get Yehuda Nasiya. And then eventually, many generations later, you get a Hillel. It took like 10 or 12 generations till you used Hillel's name. So my understanding was it was almost an act of reverence not to use his name. But then why did they use it eventually? So these are really, really good questions about what were the naming practices. It clearly was not the way we operate today, in which we jump to a name after an ancestor. So I'll give it some more thought.
What is the koach and or significance of the special kiddush cup with the names of the rivers of Eden etched within it? Should everyone use it?
Well, most people do not use a kiddush cup of that nature. I mean, I don't use a kiddush cup that way either. But in the writings of the Ari, the idea of it's totally based on Kabbalah, and that's why, if you don't have a background in Kabbalah, you wouldn't necessarily be connected to it. But it is based on the idea that the 4 rivers that flow from Gan Eden bring different types of brachos into the world. They are makor habracha, which is often described as flowing rivers from Gan Eden. Now, we also, or from Eden actually, it's quite literally, it says the rivers flowed from Eden to be mashke, to water the garden. That's also an interesting talk. That you see from the Chumash that there's something called Eden, and there's something called the Garden of Eden. Eden is even a higher level, on some level, of hashpah. Now, Shabbos is connected to the makor habracha. Shabbos is called the source of all blessing. So putting the two ideas together, on Shabbos, we are able to receive the 4 rivers that flow from Gan Eden, in a spiritual sense, because Shabbos is the source of that bracha. So that's why there are those who, in their Kiddush cup, when they sanctify the Shabbos, they want to connect to the 4 rivers that flow from Eden, because that is the Makor HaBracha. But again, I'll tell you the truth, I'm aware of this, but I have not seen that custom practiced that much, but it would be based on this teaching.
When gedolim, or anyone for that matter, advises one to daven for a given salvation, what exactly does that mean? I daven 3 times a day already, and I essentially get 1 or 2 small windows of time to make a personal request in Shema Kolenu or Anenu in Arkan Torah. Is this what they mean by daven? Or does it mean imbue every bracha in the Amidah with a relevant salvation or request that falls under that category? Or have a private conversation with Hashem on my own time? Or all of the above?
Yeah, again, it's a very non-specific bit of advice, and really all of the things you're suggesting are nichlal. I think that the common denominator is try to develop a personal, passionate relationship with God. Listen, all of us, every Orthodox person certainly, Orthodox man, I should say, at least some women as well, daven 3 times a day, right? So, and if you're already a frum person, the gadol is not telling you, oh, be sure to daven shachris, mincha, and mariv. Presumably you're already doing that. But he means to say, turn to Hashem and try to develop the idea that He is your salvation, that He is there for you, that He loves you, that He cares about you, and try to connect to Him. Now, how you try to connect to Him emotionally can take many different forms. It can mean having more kavanah in your fixed davening. It can mean, and I would actually suggest it should mean, you have private conversations with God constantly. You're driving in your car. You talk to Hashem as if you would talk to your best friend. Indeed, He is your best friend in addition to everything else. Hashem, I'm really in trouble here. I'm at the end of my rope. I don't know what to do. please, please help me. And it may be unnatural at first, but like many, many habits, you form that type of relationship with Hashem. It becomes part of your natural behavior. And then it becomes very, very meaningful and very, very powerful. Problem is we don't always have time, but the issue becomes, what can I tell you? Things that are important we do make time for. And this would be something that we try to make the time for. So I don't know if the Gadol is intending to give you a specific way of doing it, but I think he's telling you that you just need to move in the direction of having a more intimate, passionate relationship with the Ribbon Shalom.
Is there a makom in Yiddishkeit/Al-Pi Torah for a banim to tell another qualified Rav that if he continues to paskin X, he will be put in Cherem or chased out of town, etc.?
Yeah. So the question is there a makom where Rabbi A tells Rabbi B, you better stop paskening a certain way or we'll put you in Cherem? There absolutely is a makom, but one has to define that makom, meaning to say, when a rabbi is clearly, now again, this is a loaded circular type of definition, but when there's a clear violation of what is universally considered to be halachically proper behavior, and a rabbi is telling people they don't have to keep it. A rabbi is telling people, you're allowed to eat chazer today, or you're allowed to smoke on Shabbos or whatever it would be. Yeah, then in a sense, any Rav, any Talmid Chacham can basically tell that person, you're out of line, you're abusing rabbinical authority, you are misrepresenting the Torah, and we will excommunicate you. We will exclude you from the community of believing Jews and spiritual leaders. So in theory, one can easily imagine situations where this is a totally normal and natural response. Where it breaks down is that often it'll be employed in places where the halacha might be a little ambiguous, and a certain Rav takes one approach. And I think that's horrendous. So in my view, it's apikorsis. In my view, it's kefira. But objectively speaking, maybe it's not. So there, I think you have to tread with a great deal of caution. I think it would be actual chutzpah to simply assume that someone who is espousing views that are within a possible framework of legitimate Torah should be ostracized because it's not the conventional wisdom. Actually, evolution might be a good example of that, without getting myself in more trouble on this. Let's assume that a rabbi makes a talk, not referring to me, that says a Jew could believe in evolution, right, and can still be a faithful Jew. And some other rabbi feels that the theory of evolution so much contradicts the plain meaning of Genesis, of Bereshis, that this is kfira, this is apikorsis, and he declares that any rabbi who legitimates evolution is a kofar, is an apostate, and must be ostracized. Now, would that be legitimate? I think it would not be. I absolutely think it would not be, because just because you think somebody is wrong, that does not necessarily mean they're kfira. Ignorance, mistake, differences of opinion are not grounds for kfira charges. So the question that's being posed is an extraordinarily difficult question, and that is, it's very easy to say, yeah, when Rabbi number one has crossed the line into kefira, it is legitimate to put him in cherem. That's a simple statement. But whether or not that line is crossed is quite difficult sometimes. It is not as easy as we would think. Judaism has a big tent, but it's not an unlimited tent, meaning there are lines that can be crossed, and when they're crossed, there have to be sanctions, but it's a bigger tent than we sometimes think. There are people who say, anyone that says yeshiva students should be drafted in the army should be put in cherem. I think that's a ridiculous statement. Now, again, whether or not yeshiva students should be drafted in the Israeli army is a very, very legitimate issue of discussion. And there are many, many arguments against the draft, and there are some arguments in favor of the draft. But it's a machlokes. It's a machlokes within Klal Yisrael. So how can you talk about people who are espousing Deos within Klal Yisrael as being deserving of excommunication? That's totally the wrong response. The right response is argue the issue, discuss the issue, debate the issue. But don't simply invoke the person is illegitimate for espousing it.
What's the deal with the book Besamim Rosh? I've heard many say that it's a fraud.
Yeah, this is not even a question. It's a very, very fascinating issue of history. I don't have the exact date. I think it was in the 1600s or the 1700s. There was a Talmid Chacham, Rav Shaul Berlin. I don't know if he was an ancestor of the Nitziv or not. And Rav Shaul Berlin claimed to have discovered a long-lost manuscript of lost responsa of one of the greatest of the Rishonim, Rabbeinu Asher ben Yechiel, known as the Rosh. Now, we do have Tshuvas HaRosh already, but this was an undiscovered collection. Imagine how exciting that is, how gewaldic that is, to have the Tshuvas of the Rosh. And he named it, Shaul Berlin named the collection Besamim Rosh, which is a bit of a pun, the choicest Besamim, the choicest spices. Rosh is also Rush, the same name. But it turned out that this was actually a forgery, that Shaul Berlin simply wrote the Tshuvos himself, but since people would not pay so much attention to him, so he did reverse plagiarism. Instead of claiming somebody else's work as his own, he claimed work that was his own as belonging to an eminent authority. This is reverse plagiarism. So it's generally makubal. I'm not sure if it's 100% certain, but it's generally accepted that the Besamim Rosh is a forgery of Rav Shaul Berlin. Now, that immediately raises the interesting question, what is its status in halachic decision-making? Can somebody look at the Besamim Rosh and say, oh, the Besamim Rosh has such a psak, therefore we should follow it? So this is gufa, an interesting machlokes of achronim. Some achronim say, because the book is a forgery, because the book is a sheker, because it's predicated on lies, it is not considered a legitimate book of Torah scholarship, and therefore it has absolutely zero precedential authority, and the Besamim Rosh should not be used at all. That is one cheshbon. It's interesting, Rav Ovadia Yosef, who of course had an absolute encyclopedic mastery of shelos and tshuvos. I mean, this is just absolutely amazing. He must have known every shelo tshuva sefer that ever existed. He acknowledges that Besamim Rosh is a forgery, but he still uses it. And his argument is, listen, hey, the rabbi made arguments. The rabbi brought raya. See, if the Besamim Rosh would have just been a book of psakim, Asur, Mutter, Pater, Chayav, we could then say, okay, why should I rely on what a liar says? But the Besamim Rosh is not that type of book. The Besamim Rosh discusses the Gemaras and the Rishonim and the Rashi and Tosfos, people that the Rosh would have discussed, and he backs up his arguments. So Ovadia says, why can we not utilize the arguments and svaras that the Sefer says, even though it was technically a forgery? So some will use the Besamim Rosh. Not only that, now this is going to be a very radical idea, but even the idea of reverse plagiarism is not considered to be so bad. There is precedent in the Gemara itself that sometimes an Amora would say something in the name of a greater predecessor in order that his words would be makubal. In other words, the idea would be, let's say, I believe in the halacha very strongly, but you're not accepting it from me, because who am I? So I might say, Rav Moshe Feinstein said it. And then you'll say, oh, Rav Moshe Feinstein, wow, okay, that's a different thing. Hopefully you won't ask for a source. So the Gemara actually says, it's a pella, it's an amazing thing, but there are actually Gemaras that indicates that such a strategy was permissible in order to convince someone to accept what you regarded as Torah emes. So seen in that way, not only was the Besamim Rosh considered to be a legitimate halachic authority in terms of his argument, but he wasn't even morally condemned for what he did, because this was a way that he could get his Torah mekupel in the world. So we have many, many different views about the Besamim Rosh, but I think it's almost universally acknowledged that indeed it is a forgery of the Tshuvas Harash.
What is the Torah view on communicating with non-Jews out in the world? It is self-understood that in the workplace there are unique sets of challenges, but this question is for outside the work arena. For example, I'm on a plane or in a doctor's waiting room. Does the Torah want me to share a kind word or a comment about the weather to the non-Jew sitting next to me? Or better just to smile and remain quiet listening to my Rabbi Breitowitz podcast?
Yeah. So really the question breaks down into a number of components. I mean, if you're asking me, should I smile at the non-Jew? Should I say, how are you doing? Have a good day? Should I give words of chizuk, words of encouragement? I say very definitely do so. The Gemara mentions that Rav Yochanan, when he walked in the street, gave shalom to everybody. He was makdim shalom. He said it first. Afilu, the Gemara makes the point, nachri bashuk, even a non-Jew. So number one, part of that is to recognize that all people, Jew and non-Jew, all races, all colors, are in the image of God and are deserving of dignity and respect. That's one aspect of it. Another aspect of it is kiddush Hashem, that at least if you're recognizably a religious Jew, they should see that you're a kind and considerate person. So by all means, talk, say hello, how are you, etc. Now, where it gets a little tricky is when you're talking about extended friendships. For example, should I invite the non-Jew to a barbecue that I'm making? Should I invite him to my son's bar mitzvah? And the like. Should we do things together? There, it is more questionable. I would actually think that the overall hashkafa of the Torah is that we try to minimize our connections with the non-Jewish world. In that way, we kind of limit it to being polite, being nice, being there when they need us to give chesed and the like, but not necessarily creating deep friendships with non-Jews, simply because the value systems are different and ultimately we do get affected. They tell a story, it's kind of a joke story, it's probably not a true story, about two people who were waiting for a train in Switzerland, and one was Jewish, one was non-Jewish. And the non-Jew asked the Jew what time it is. And the joke goes, the Jew didn't respond. And he kept on asking him, the Jew didn't respond. Finally, he says to him, why don't you tell me what time it is? He says, well, I'll tell you why. I'll tell you what time it is, and then we'll get on the train, and you'll sit next to me, and we'll be talking about politics. And then you'll want to know where I live. Again, it was a long story, but it ends. And then you're going to marry my daughter. And since I don't want you to marry my daughter, I'm not going to tell you what time it is. Now, that's very extreme. That is very extreme. And in many ways, that's chilul Hashem. And that's the opposite of what I'm talking about. But there's a kernel of truth in the attitude that's being espoused. That Chazal did want there to be a certain amount of distancing because we learn from each other. Now, some might argue maybe that only applied to the Avodah Zarah that were pagans, and maybe it doesn't apply to religious Christians or Muslims. Maybe so. But I think we do have to be careful. Now, even that, though, is not universal. I mean, one outstanding example is in the Gemara itself. Rav Ovadia Yosef had a very, very close friend, Antoninus. Now, who is the Antoninus that Rebbe was so close to? Itself is uncertain. The simple meaning of the Gemara was, this is one of the emperors of Rome. And then the question is, which one? Some identify it with Marcus Aurelius, who was a great, great philosopher. On the other hand, others say that the term Caesar in Chazal does not have to mean the imperial Caesar, but it could also refer to the governor of the province. In other words, Syria, Palestine was ruled by a governor, and maybe that makes more sense that Rebbe was closer to the provincial head. But whatever it is, this is clearly described as an intimate friendship, a caring friendship. And in modern times, I wouldn't say it's common, but the Sridei Eish, Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg, had very, very close friendships with prominent non-Jewish academics. So it may depend. But as I say, I think the overall orientation is be nice, be friendly, be helpful, make a kiddush Hashem, but don't really develop close and intimate relations.
What is the view of the gedolim in terms of Bachrim going to sign up to the IDF and combat in the current situation? Is this war not viewed, as the Rambam seems to learn, as being as Milchemes Mitzvah? If so, why not? Or is it that gedolim are seeing certain things that they are not telling us, and it is sort of like a Harav?
Yeah, this is a difficult question, and again, I've addressed it many times, and I will admit, without tremendous success. It's complicating, it's evolving, and I have to say that even from being within the Haredi world, it's difficult to pinpoint exactly what the position of our gedolim is at any given moment, because things are changing. On one hand, gedolim are coming out and saying that chas v'shalom, we cannot allow anyone to register for the draft, and if the law will require it, we have civil disobedience, or we will leave the country if necessary. On the other hand, I also read that there are members of the Haredi parties in the Knesset who are actually negotiating to allow up to 50% of the Haredi eligible population to go into the army. So there are things that are being said publicly that are not the same as being said privately. So it's very, very difficult. Now, I don't want to go over in great detail, because every time I go over it, I leave something out, and that's really part of the problem when I do something many times. So I don't say every point every time. I'll just, once again, present the two arguments, the two sides of the argument. Argument number one, in favor of a conscription, is that because Jewish lives and Jewish survival is at stake, this is a Milchemes Mitzvah, an obligatory war. Milchemes Mitzvah, there are no exemptions, and therefore this would require that everybody who is able to participate in the military effort should do so. Argument on the other side is that some say, according to the Rambam, this is a very technical argument, even a Milchemes Mitzvah requires an authorized Melech Yisrael, and without a Melech, there is no legitimate power to declare a Milchemes Mitzvah. That's one argument. Argument number two is based on the Rambam, that it is possible that full-time learners of Torah qualify as Shevet Levi, and Shevet Levi is exempt even from Milchemes Mitzvah. Argument number three, which may not resonate so much today, is historically there was no real manpower shortage, and therefore, until there is an absolute manpower shortage, there is no obligation to conscript B'nai Torah, and when there's no obligation, they shouldn't be conscripted, because that takes them away from Torah. Now, as I say, that argument is beginning to wear thin a little bit, because the war is lasting much longer than we thought. But those are the two issues. In other words, Milchemes Mitzvah on one hand. On the other hand, you need a Melech. Lomdei Torah are patur even from Milchemes Mitzvah. No real military necessity. And the generic fear is that the army is a dangerous, well, of course, I don't mean physically dangerous, that comes with the territory, but it's a spiritually dangerous environment for a Ben Torah, because it can undermine his commitment. Now, once again, all I can say to that is, sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. It is true that there were B'nai Torah who entered the army who became less religious and less committed as a result. No question about it. On the other hand, there are outstanding examples of B'nai Torah like the Hester, who not only remained firm, but they continued to grow in Torah and mitzvahs and learning as they were defending Am Yisrael. But nevertheless, I don't want to call it a crapshoot, but it is a gamble as to what happens. So as a result, the halachic issues get intertwined with hashkafic issues, with your fear of what will happen to your own children, of your fear of the government controlling the Torah community, and the like. And the fact that all I can tell you is, and I'll be very, very honest, that because of this war and because of how long this has been going on, and because of the military shortage and because of the pressures from the government, this is forcing the yeshiva community to rethink, to reevaluate, to reconceptualize, to kind of at least consider the possibility of different approaches than they've taken in the past. And right now, we don't really know where that's going to go. So if the questioner is confused, there is a good reason to be confused, because right now we're not at a place of clarity. Now, let me just say one side point maybe. If the issue is registering for the draft and then fighting, seeking exemptions, that already is a different machlokas. It's yadua that both Rav Chaim Kanievsky and a number of other gedolim, I can't remember his name, Rav Chaim Kanievsky and Rav Steinman, they did take the position that Bachrim should comply with the registration and then seek the exemption, as opposed to Rav Shmuel Auerbach, who took the position that you have to have absolute disobedience, and that resulted in Peleg and all of the disturbances. That's really a separate type of issue. But both of them were united that the Bachrim ought to be exempt. But as I say, that for the first time is being reconsidered right now.
Many of the custodial staff in yeshiva are Eritrean refugees. Is the Rav pro-Israel accepting them as refugees? If not, which other country will take them out of their suffering?
I'm sorry, refugees from where, you say?
Eritrea.
Where is Eritrea?
North of Ethiopia.
Yeah. It's a very, very good question. I think that one of the things that we can be most proud of in the state of Israel, whether you're against Zionism, pro-Zionism, against Zionism, whatever it is, but the fact is, Chazal tell us that the Jewish people are rachmanim, are compassionate, and gomlei chasadim, and people that want to do kindness. And to take in refugees who are being persecuted is one of the great, great qualities of the Jewish soul and of Eretz Yisrael. Now, the issue, of course, has to be, it's very similar to kind of what's going on in America. Of course, in America it's probably a bigger scale, although we're a much smaller country, so it might be just as bad here. And that is, you have to keep this a Jewish nation. And you can't allow the demographics to dilute the Jewish nature of the state so that, God forbid, it could be taken over by a foreign nationality. This was a very similar problem we faced even with Russian Jews, many of whom were not Jewish, in which you had huge percentage of people who might not be Jewish. So there needs to be some types of controls here, but I think overall, the notion of accepting people from persecuted environments is just the Jewish thing to do. Rachmanim b'nei Rachmanim. This is what we do.
Was the state of Israel correct for saving Ethiopian Jews? Is the Ethiopian Masorah valid? Do they have any great rabbis in history? And what about the Bene Israel of India?
Yeah, is this the same question or different?
Same question.
Oh, same question. Yeah. So I think the short answer is this. The short answer is really the tshuva of Moshe Feinstein. Initially when the...
I need to go get more questions. I forgot to bring them.
Oh, okay. So should I talk?
It's like 3 more, yeah.
Should I talk? Continue talking, or should I wait?
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, when the Ethiopian Jews began to come, so many, Rav Ovadia Yosef cited a tshuva from the Radvaz going back to the 1500s, that they are descendants of Shevet Dan, and they don't need conversion, and they're halachically Jewish. Rav Moshe Feinstein took the position that whether or not they are halachically Jewish cannot be established with requisite certainty. And therefore, Rav Moshe's position is they are a Safek Yehudi, Safek Nochri. As a result, if they want to marry Jews, they have to undergo a conversion, a gior l'chumra. This was Rav Moshe's position. Again, the Rabbanut has fluctuated on this. But Rav Moshe says, if they're a Safek, we have to save them, we have to rescue them, we have to protect them. So, in a sense, Rav Moshe was kind of splitting it, meaning the chiyuv to save them and protect them does not depend on a definitive finding that they're Jewish. The possibility that they're Jewish is enough. Now, obviously, over hundreds and hundreds of years, even if they were Jewish, they were totally cut off from the Messiah. They didn't have the Torah Shebaal Peh. They didn't have the Talmud. They had their own traditions. In many, many ways, although they were very devout and they were very committed, but they were committed to kind of a different religion. I mean, just like you can have a very religious Karaite. A Karaite can be very frum in terms of Karaitism, but it's not halachic Judaism. So, nevertheless, perhaps they did have a Jewish origin, and Rav Moshe said we have to be machmer l'chumra to be matzel them. Now, I think a similar paradigm could apply to the Bene Israel as well. As far as I know, in both the Ethiopian community and in the Indian community, there is no evidence of any particular great rabbis. But again, it depends how you define a great rabbi. There is no great rabbi in the Talmudic tradition. They did have great leaders who were very devoted and committed, but once again, their version of Judaism was not a version that we regard as necessarily authentic. That doesn't mean I don't appreciate the Mesirat Nefesh. If they would walk miles, not to violate Shabbat or whatever it is, that shows a deep commitment and love of God. But in terms of their knowledge base, it simply was an insufficient knowledge base. But as I say, in terms of helping them and settling them, that would be part of our obligation, even misafek.
A Kohen can prepare for the building of the Beis Hamikdash by learning about karbanos, etc. How is a Levi supposed to prepare?
Well, go to music school. How does a Levi prepare? Yeah, so I'll tell you something interesting. Leviim had a number of jobs in the Beis Hamikdash besides singing and musicians. In fact, if you look at the book of Divrei Hayamim, Chronicles 1 in particular, remember the famous idea that David HaMelech wanted to build the Beis Hamikdash, but Nasan Hanavi, who initially said yes, got the message from Hashem that David is not allowed to build a Beis Hamikdash because he was a man of bloodshed, and only his son Shlomo will build the Beis Hamikdash, and indeed that was the case. But if you then go on and see a number of chapters where David made many, many preparations for building the Beis Hamikdash, gathering the gold and the silver, even the blueprints. The blueprints of the Beis Hamikdash were done by David in consultation with Nasan, and Shlomo HaMelech was given a blueprint of the Beis Hamikdash. But one of the things that David did as well was prepare rosters of Kohanim and Leviim, 24 rosters of Kohanim. Each Mishmor would do the Avodah for a week, and there was a corresponding Levite Mishmor. Now, if you look at this, though, only a small number of them actually sang. They needed 12 singers a day, and it's not even clear that they rotated it through the week. That means each Mishmor had only 12 people who sang. So a Mishmor may have had thousands of Leviim who were not singers. So some of them were called gatekeepers, they were honor guards. But others, many of them were involved in many, many, many details of the avodah, So, for example, although the korbanos per se have to be done by the Kohanim, other than shechita, but a Levi could shecht, of course a Yisrael could shecht as well. Leviim baked the lechem hapanim, they baked the menachot, they did a lot of the activities that enabled the korbanos to be brought. So in a sense, my recommendation would be that a Levi should also study the details of the menachos, of the lechem hapanim, of the skinning of the ola, because they did that, the hafshet. And so once again, the curriculum of the Levi would not be so different than the curriculum of the Kohen.
Does the prohibition for a son to sit in his father's seat apply outside the home? For example, his makom kavua and shel. What about a temporary seat, like at a simcha or even at a restaurant?
Yeah. So the halacha that a son or a child is not allowed to sit in the makom of his father does not only apply to a home, but it applies whenever it is a makom, exactly as the questioner said, a makom kavua. So if the father has a designated place where he sits, this would typically be either in the home or in the shul, or even in his father's office. The son or the daughter is not allowed to sit there. But if it is a temporary seat, like in a restaurant, there is no problem. Let me point out that the Isser of sitting in the Makam Kavua is something that the father or the mother can be mochel. And indeed, it's been said that in at least modern day society, most parents are not makbid on this, and therefore they're given permission. It's interesting, I once read an article written by, or at least an interview, with the Chafetz Chaim's last child. Chafetz Chaim, in his second marriage, had a bas sekunim, had a daughter and when he was very old, and that daughter became Rebbetzin Zaks. She married Reb Menachem Mendel Zaks, who had taught at YU for many, many years. He was the Chafetz Chaim's son-in-law. And she described what it was like to be raised by the Chafetz Chaim. And she said he was a very, very gentle father. He didn't really care about kavod at all. We could sit in his chair. He didn't care. He cared about whether we told the truth, whether we spoke Lashon Hara. She told the story that when volumes of the Mishnah Berurah came to him for proof checking, because you have to go through and see if there's any unprinted pages. So he said, could you just leaf through the Mishnah Berurahs to see if there's any pages that are not printed? And he wanted her to do 10 sets. Now that would have been 60 volumes. Wouldn't have taken that long. It would have taken an hour, probably. And she said she was going out to play, so she tells the Chafetz Chaim, I can't do it now. When I get back, I can do 10 times that amount. So she comes back 2 hours later, and there are 600 volumes of Mishnah Berurah on the table. So she says, how am I supposed to do that? He says, well, I gave you 60, and you said you could do 10 times. He says, a Jew doesn't lie. If you say you're going to do it, you got to do it. So those were the things he was makbid on, but he was not makbid on yeshiva b'mkaimai. So more or less, we're relatively liberal on that. But halachically, if the parent is not mochel, there would be such an isser, but only in a makam kabua. That's it. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, I don't know when people will see this, but I wish everybody a Chag Kasher VSameach, and may the Pesach be a zman of Geula and Yeshua for Klal Yisrael. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this VSameach production. To find out more and to partner in our mission, please visit ohr.edu.